It was incredible. It was controversial, and it had us on the edges of our seats for about 4 hours. Let's talk about that Miami win.
You are Locked On Canes, your daily podcast on the Miami Hurricanes, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Victory Saturday. I'm happy that I'm even here today to talk about last night because, guys, I had so much anxiety. By the fourth quarter, I was breathing into a paper bag. I was having heart palpitations. It only got worse during that 10-minute review on that final play. And yeah, we'll talk about the controversy. We'll talk about everything that happened last night in Miami's 38-34 victory against the Virginia Tech Hokies. I am Alex Donno, University of Miami alumnus, co-host of Locked On ACC, and writer for Canes County on Rivals. Thank you so much to the everydayers for making Locked On Canes your first listen and your first watch today. We are live, by the way, so smash that like button. We're available free wherever you get your podcasts. We're available free on YouTube. We're part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Place your first $5 bet, and you'll get started with $200 in bonus bets guaranteed. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. So we will talk about what didn't go right for Miami in terms of why the game was as close and dramatic as it was. We will definitely talk about the absolute magic that Cam Ward and his teammates had to create in that fourth quarter for Miami to score those two late touchdowns that they needed to win that game. We will talk about that controversial final play and what the ACC has said about it today, because I see all the debates. They're raging on social media. People saying, Hokies got robbed. The ACC, they're trying to protect the only team that can win their conference this year. They're protecting the Golden Goose, as if the ACC has ever done any favors ever or gone out of their way to do so against Miami. But I want to talk about what a victory like this can do for a football team. And folks, again, there are a lot of negatives that are going to show up on film. A lot of things. Mario Cristobal, defensive coordinator Lance Guidry, every assistant coach on that defense are going to be scrutinizing and trying to fix before Cal, before Louisville, before Florida State. But at the same time, when you come from behind the way that Miami did, and you show that character at home where the Hurricanes, folks, are literally with 5 minutes and 17 seconds left in the game before Cam Ward threw the touchdown to Cam McCormick to pull within one score. Miami is down 10 points with 5 minutes and 17 seconds left in that football game. That was magic on that second to last Miami drive. It was pure magic on the final drive where you almost felt like there was divine intervention with some of the plays that Ward was making. The fourth down to Xavier Restrepo, the flip out to Riley Williams, the ball that skidded off the turf that really should never have been corralled that snap. I was listening, and I did the post-game show on 560 WQAM radio, which is the flagship station for Miami Hurricanes football. And before I took over on the post-game, I'm listening to Don Bailey Jr., Miami Hurricanes color analyst. He gets the interviews after the game. He talked to Coach Cristobal. He talked to the quarterback Cam Ward. He also talked to Michael Irvin. And the playmaker was on those sidelines last night, creating some absolute juice. You see the relationship he has with Miami's receivers. You see the relationship that Michael Irvin has developed with Cam Ward, and the playmaker after the game. And again, I know that this is the type of win that even some Miami fans will come out of this and say, wow, well, thankfully we got the win, but we were exposed in so many ways. But Michael Irvin's point after the game was championship teams need to grind out wins like this. You talk about the character that can be built, the growth that can come from a game like this where you're down 10 points with a little over 5 minutes left in the game. What do you think the win probability was for Virginia Tech at that point? Right? You can actually follow those live on ESPN. They have their win probability. I wasn't following it live during the game. I was too busy having panic attacks watching it. But I would imagine up 10 points with 5 minutes to go. Virginia Tech's win probability was probably in the high 90 percentile, 94, 95%. Miami 5% to win that game. To come away with a comeback like that, to galvanize that locker room, to show even when we're at our worst, because that was the worst performance Miami has played this year, bar none. Not even close. That was the worst performance Miami has played. To still find a way to dig deep and make that comeback. I'm not comparing the teams. Far be it for me to compare the teams, but I will compare the situation. You go back to the 2001 Hurricanes team. Your memories probably were, hey, you just blew out everybody en route to a national championship. That wasn't the case. Miami nearly got upset by a Boston College team that had no business even keeping the game close against Miami, and the Hurricanes were able to come away with a dramatic victory when they were far from their best. The Matt Walters interception, Ed Reed essentially ripped it from his hands to return it the other way for a game-sealing touchdown. These are the types of moments that build character, that build team when you're at your worst and you still find a way to dig deep and get a victory like that. That was Michael Irvin's point last night. And, now Irvin used a phrase that I don't use this around here. I do not use this phrase, but I did overhear Michael Irvin even say Miami is quote unquote back all the way back, he said, after pulling out that win. And I'm not going to get ahead of myself again, because obviously if you make the types of mistakes that you made last night against Virginia Tech throughout the year, we're not talking about a championship team. But if you can, and here's the other thing, and I had a conversation about this with Don Bailey Jr. last night, Miami Hurricanes color analyst. There are plenty of lessons to be learned after that Virginia Tech game. If you can learn those lessons in a victory rather than in a defeat, taking care of the football, tackling, simple defensive assignments that were blown throughout that game, if you can use a victory to teach those lessons rather than a loss, that can go a long way. That makes the lives of these coaches a whole lot easier. So, man, you talk about absolute drama last night, and I want to go back to conversations that we had the last couple of days with people like Brian Smith, our recruiting overlord. I talked about the game with Brian. We talked about the game with Grease, the postcast hosts. We did an episode with him yesterday. Now, first of all, I will admit I was wrong on the way the game would play out. I thought it would be another comfortable, easy victory for the Hurricanes. I probably overreacted to how poorly Virginia Tech had played to start the year. My prediction, not right, heading into the game, was 42-16 Hurricanes. That was on me. Miami won the game. Obviously, they didn't cover the 17.5-point spread. But something that we did get right here on Locked On Canes, despite the fact that we had the score and the tone of the game way off, okay? When we talked about what it would take for Virginia Tech to keep the game close and potentially upset Miami, as they almost did, be way in the plus in the turnover margin, which they were. Miami was careless with the football. Virginia Tech, 2 out of those 3 turnovers they took advantage of for touchdowns. The other one, they ran that bonehead. That was really bad by Brent Pry to go for that fake field goal. I don't know what he was thinking. You take the points there. Thank you, coach, for the gift, is what Miami got last night. But to be way in the plus in the turnover margin, which the Hokies were, and to start fast, which Virginia Tech had not done in their losses. In Virginia Tech's previous losses to Vanderbilt, they were down 17-0. To Rutgers, they were down 14-0. And Rutgers is good, by the way. They just beat Washington yesterday. So Virginia Tech started fast. They won the turnover margin. They ran all over Miami. You knew their rushing game was going to have to work, and it did. And that was nearly the recipe for success for the Hokies. Now, despite some of the fourth quarter magic that Miami created, and I will note, by the way, for as bad as Miami's defense was in that game, there was one player, maybe more than one, but specifically one player that I want to shout out who played really well on the defensive side of the football, and that's Malik Bryant. He had himself a game, number 24. Malik Bryant made some disruptive plays. Miami would not have won the game if he hadn't have made those plays. So that's number one. The other thing, we're going to talk about this when we come back, folks, because again, despite Miami's late game heroics, that football game last night came down to a very controversial play, a controversial call, and it's something people are still talking about this, arguing, debating, complaining about it on TV, on social media, on other YouTube channels. We've got to talk about the incompletion, or was it a catch? Should Virginia Tech have ultimately won that game? We will discuss the situation. We will discuss why the ACC officials made the call that they did, and we'll see if we can get some clarity and maybe put this whole thing to bed. So, folks, we are only getting started. It's a victory Saturday, and I love how I get to just enjoy the rest of my college football Saturday without having to stress about Miami today. I stressed about Miami enough yesterday. We will talk about the catch that wasn't at the end of that game. You want to keep it locked right here. We're literally only getting started on this brand new episode of Locked On Canes. Folks, with Robinhood Gold, you don't need a silver spoon to eat up the financial favors of the 1%. Robinhood Gold allows others to get the rates and perks usually reserved for the high society. Now, the resourceful individual with Robinhood Gold can earn the very liberal rate of 4.5% APY on uninvested cash, receive unlimited 1% deposit bonuses, and be rewarded with a handsome 3% retirement boost on an IRA account. Robinhood Gold provides the privileges of a high net worth for any net worth. These generous benefits are now available for only $5 a month. The new gold standard is here with Robinhood Gold. Sign up at robinhood.com/gold. Terms apply. For product-specific disclosures, visit robinhood.com/gold. Investing involves risks. Rates may change. Gold membership is offered by Robinhood Gold, LLC. Thank you so much for making this live episode of Locked On Canes your first listen and your first watch today. If you listen to the audio version, make sure you subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, wherever you get your pods. If you're watching the video version, if you happen to be watching us live right now, make sure you smash that like button. Smash that like button and subscribe to Locked On Canes on YouTube and spread the word. By the way, I agree with what our guy Fresh is saying in the live chat. We really need Bane and we need Jalen Rivers. And I'm done playing the guessing game on what's going on with those guys, because every single week we get it painted to us from the coaches that, hey, they're really close, maybe this week. And by the way, I watched Ruben Bain in warmups. Like he looks pretty close to being back. So hopefully next week against Cal is the week for him and it's the week for Rivers. But yeah, especially Bain, because unfortunately, I don't have injury statuses today. We'll find out more next week, but Miami's defensive linemen were dropping like flies in that game. So we really need, hopefully it's, nothing long-term or anything like that, but we really could have used Ruben Bain last night. So hopefully he's going to be back soon. All right. So, despite everything good that I've said about that Miami victory, ultimately the final result, which is a 38-34 Miami win, it came down to a final, essentially a Hail Mary pass by Kyron Drones and Virginia Tech, and a very controversial call. People are going to be arguing about this, certainly for the next several days, if not for the next several months. Did Miami steal a win? Did the officials put the fix in for Miami? So Kyron Drones, who, by the way, Cam Ward was a magician. Drones, who's his cousin, I guess it's like a family gene, I guess. Like he made some crazy throws outside the pocket, and Drones lofts one 30 yards into the end zone on that final play. And Da'Quon Felton, 6'5" in the Hokies receiving core, was the guy who thought he came down with it, came very close to coming down with it. When the play was happening live, we couldn't see what was happening with that football. But all we saw was a Miami player emerged from a pile of bodies with it and started to celebrate. They did that thing where they do the party lights at Hard Rock Stadium, like they blacked it out, everyone's celebrating, and then the officials are like, is this one official who was the guy who was making most of the excuse me, get myself so worked up. The one official who was like the guy who, made most of the calls that were against Miami. And by the way, there were definitely some calls that also went against Virginia Tech. The officiating crew was terrible. That's the ACC, okay? I did think that they ultimately got it right, though, on that final play. But after Miami started celebrating, they said, no, the ruling on the field is a touchdown. Virginia Tech starts celebrating. And then the referee has to keep saying, stay on the field. The game is not over. The play is under review. They review that play for I was told it was 10 minutes, roughly, the review. It felt like 45 minutes. My life was flashing before my eyes. I was breathing heavy. I was having heart palpitations. I was so nervous. They showed the replay 1,000 times from 1,000 different angles. And most of the replays I saw, some of the angles, you just couldn't see anything. Most of the replay angles I saw, it looked like the ball was bobbling and was never secure. So I'm thinking, how did you rule that a catch in the first place? It was close, but it was not a catch, right? And so what sent me into a panic, and this seems to be the point of contention for a lot of people out there who thought they were wrong to reverse the call, was the fact that they ruled it initially a catch. Because the initial ruling, it does matter, right? Because then you have to have indisputable evidence to overturn it. So for all the, Virginia Tech fans out there, the people who just hate Miami, or also the people who wanted to see an upset, right? Because Virginia Tech, they were, 17 and a half point dogs. So a lot of people were just rooting for number 7 might go down tonight. So there were a lot of people hoping they would confirm the call on the field. But I'm like, how do you make that call on the field as a touchdown in the first place? But yes, I was very nervous about whether or not they would have enough evidence to overturn it, even though I didn't think it was a catch. Watching like the actual replay angles where you could see the ball was moving, I didn't see how that could be a catch, but I was really worried they wouldn't see enough evidence to overturn it. Now, here is the statement that the ACC officials made after the game. Want to make sure I have this. Okay, here's the exact quote. During the review process of the last play, and by the way, they had everybody involved. Like I'm pretty sure they had people at NASA that were looking at it. They had ACC headquarters in Charlotte. They were looking at it. It wasn't just the official under the hood. They had like multiple command centers reviewing that play, because no matter which way you call it, you were going to piss people off, right? Whichever way you called it, someone was going to felt hosed. Someone was going to feel hosed by that final call. So here was their statement. During the review process of the last play, it was determined that the loose ball was touched by a Miami player while he was out of bounds, which makes it an incomplete pass. It immediately ends the play. So for those who said you don't have indisputable evidence, that was indisputable evidence. Maybe that's a wrinkle in the rules that you're not aware of. Maybe it's a part of the rule book you didn't know about, so you saw it a certain way and you thought the call should have been upheld. But folks, I know, again, this is not going to make the Virginia Tech fans feel any better. It's certainly not going to make the Miami fans feel any better. But by the letter of the law, seems to me like they ended up getting the call right. Now, I'm willing to have some perspective on this, folks, and you should as well. So obviously, Virginia Tech fans this is not going to change the fact that they feel like they had a win stolen from them last night. You're not going to change that, right? You're not going to change the opinions of Florida State fans and Florida fans and Clemson fans, whoever who was rooting for Virginia Tech to get that win on that play. I know I'm not going to change anyone's opinion on this, but when I think of perspective on this, imagine if the shoe had been on the other foot, because these officials, somebody was going to feel robbed by this in either direction. Can you imagine if they had ruled that an incomplete on the field, reviewed it, and then overturned it and called it a Virginia Tech touchdown? If that were the case, the outrage, which I believe would even be more justified, would be coming from the Miami side. And, you have to understand, no matter what decision they made, I think they made the right one. Maybe you disagree. I believe they made the right decision based on the rules and based on the fact that that ball was never secure. But no matter what decision they made at the end of the day, someone was going to feel hosed. Someone was going to feel robbed by that. So, oh man, it was wild. It was wild. And I will admit, when they ultimately overturned the catch, I was shocked, because usually Miami fans, when it comes to officiating, especially ACC officials, we usually can't have nice things, right? Now, there was earlier in the game, I thought the officials really botched a holding call that they called on Markel Bell that overturned a Jacolby George touchdown. I thought that was a bogus call. That touchdown should have held up, and that ended up being a 14-point swing. And obviously the referees weren't the ones who threw an interception on the next play. But by overruling that touchdown, which I believe should have stood, Cam Ward throws an interception on the next play. Hokies score a touchdown a couple plays later. That was a 14-point swing. I know that there was also a questionable call that they made later in the game that overruled a Hokies touchdown on a holding call that was very questionable. Like, we can agree the officiating was bad. Like, we can agree that, but I do think ultimately they got the right call. And there was another one, this is a very petty rule, and so I'm not going to complain too much about this, but when Virginia Tech hit their 57-yard field goal, and on a side note, why does every college kicker turn into Lou Groza when they line up against Miami? You had a Grammatica son hitting 59-yarders last week. You've got a Virginia Tech kicker who had never kicked one over 50 yards before, hits a 57-yarder and a 52-yarder in the game. And on the 57-yard field goal, Virginia Tech had two number 17s on the field, which is against the rules. So technically that shouldn't, very petty. Like, I'm not saying you should have wiped that off the board, but all these examples are how bad the officiating was, man. And so ultimately, Miami, I was surprised. Miami gets the call, go in their favor at the end, and I got to give some props to the fans at Hard Rock Stadium, because that building got loud when we needed it most. During the fourth quarter comeback, it was very loud when Virginia Tech was on offense. Miami, they didn't do a lot of this yesterday, but they did make a couple of defensive stops in the second half. I thought the 12th man in the crowd was a big part of that. I know Miami fans have this terrible reputation. Like, there are no fans. They don't show up. They don't cheer. Like, that building was very, very loud last night. And I appreciate you guys who were whether you're in the expensive seats or the cheap seats, you were making a lot of noise. Miami, for what it's worth, they only gave up 10 points in the second half. So the defense were not good, but they did clamp down at timely spots in that second half. And let's talk about some of the standouts. Now, I already mentioned, I thought Malik Bryant, number 24, was my defensive MVP. He's the one who blew up the fake field goal that Brent Pry was an idiot to go for. Just take the points, man. Your kicker can't miss. Take the points. But Malik Bryant blew up that play. He had another 1.5 tackles for loss in the game. He had a half a sack in the game. I thought for a defense that struggled, he was a bright spot on that defense, and he played really, really well. And but on the flip side, I want to talk about the plays that Miami's D left on the field, but I also want to talk about Cam Ward's magic. You guys want to keep it locked right here. And make sure you're smashing that like button, subscribing to Locked On Canes, because we're only getting started on this brand new episode of Locked On Canes. You want to keep it locked. And I'm only getting started with FanDuel. Now, Miami did not cover the 17.5. We know that, but we've been making money. In fact, Miami's previous 4 games, they covered every spread. So we're still in the plus when it comes to the Hurricanes. And we're having a great time wagering on all these games, all these over-unders. They did hit the over last night at FanDuel, America's #1 sports book. And hey, NFL fans, there's another big weekend coming up. You can start the season with a big return on FanDuel. So when you get a hunch in the middle of the game, you can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more on the same page where you place your bets. You'll get started with $200 in bonus bets guaranteed when you place your first $5 bet. That's FanDuel.com, America's #1 sportsbook. Thank you so much for making Locked On Canes your first listen and your first watch today. We appreciate the everydayers. And if you want to take your everydayer experience to the next level, make sure you sign up to become a Locked On Canes insider. I was trying not to text the insiders too much yesterday, because I would have just been dropping F-bombs on the insiders chat. But if you sign up to become a Locked On Canes insider, you click the link in the show description below. You get text messages directly from my phone to yours with breaking news, recruiting updates, show previews, one-on-one questions and answers with me. And you can try it free for 14 days. Try it free. Click the link below. If you like it, you can opt in for $4.99 a month. We give you a lot of added value on there on the Locked On Canes Insiders chat. And the other thing about this game, and again, like, Miami didn't, outside of a few individuals, Miami didn't really earn style points in that win, but it is still a rivalry game. It's a good point by We Are on You Now. What kind of a username is that, bro? I don't even know what that is. But whoever this is says this is a rivalry game. Miami used to beat Tech when we were you know what. Well, you know what? man, a rivalry game means you're going to get some closer games in this series. Virginia Tech, they played their best game of the season so far. Miami played their worst, so I'm thankful Miami came away with a victory. I mean, the Hokies rushed for 206 yards in the game, and especially for the first three quarters, Felton was carving Miami up. 19 carries, 141 yards. Kyron Drones had 10 carries for 41 yards. Like Miami's defense really seemed to struggle with the misdirection. I think that's something that they're going to have to look at before the Cal game, and then they have the bye week after that. And then the other thing was Miami's tackling. That was 2021 bad, that tackling. You remember, I think it was 20 the year that Miami led the nation and missed tackles. It was either it must have been 2021 because 2020 was the COVID year. They didn't play as many games. So Miami's missed tackling was 2021 bad. How bad was it, you ask? Hurricanes missed 21 tackles in that Virginia Tech game. How you actually found a way to win the game despite committing 3 turnovers on offense, 21 missed tackles on defense, we should feel fortunate to come away with a victory. So to put it in perspective, 21 missed tackles against Virginia Tech. In the previous 4 games that Miami played, they missed a combined 22 tackles. Then in one night, they nearly double that total for the season. That was inexcusable. The way every time Felton tooted the rock. See, I don't even know if I did that on purpose. Every time Felton toted the rock, the guy was guaranteed 4 or 5 yards before he was even really touched, because arm tackles, the first guy was always missing. So that's a big thing that Miami has to improve. We take a look at the team stats. Miami ultimately did outgain the Hokies 508 to 394. Miami had 343 passing yards to 188. Hurricanes ended up with 165 rushing yards, but Miami's early running game is a huge concern. Like, it's, I tried to downplay it a little bit after the first few games. I can't downplay it anymore. 32 rushing yards at halftime. Now, I'm happy that they're able to establish the run in the second half. And in fact, if Miami hadn't started establishing the run in the second half when they finally got going, they would have gotten blown out if they hadn't established the run. Because in the second quarter, when Miami could not or would not run the football, Cam Ward is dropping back on every single play. Virginia Tech's pressure, Miami's offensive line did not have an answer for APR, Antoine Powell Ryland, who was really getting loose on that defensive line for Virginia Tech. Miami was having trouble protecting Ward. And they were having trouble protecting Ward because they couldn't establish a running game. They got the running game going in the second half, and thankfully they did. So after 32 rushing yards at halftime, Miami ends up with 165 yards on the day, and Cam Ward was a big part of that, 10 carries for 57 yards and a touchdown. Damian Martinez had 14 carries for 60 yards. Chris Johnson had a big carry on that reverse, 1 carry for 24 yards. That was a huge play that Miami made. Now, when we talk about Cam Ward's magic, now in a weird way, despite the fact that Ward did a lot of the bad things that all the haters would talk about, like the guy's a turnover machine, good luck winning with Ward. Like, we saw some of that last night. The fumble early for Miami that led to a Virginia Tech touchdown. Cam Ward just tried to do too much, committed that fumble. 2 interceptions in the game. One of them was nearly a pick six, by the way. That was Caleb Spencer, former Miami Hurricane. Of course. This guy was still with Miami in the spring. Caleb Spencer almost had a pick six. Thankfully, that play. Who was it? Was it Elijah Arroyo, I think, that stopped him on the pick six? That was the last man to beat. Thankfully, he stopped him. But, you had the turnover bug for Ward. But in a weird way, despite the fact that he turned it over 3 times, I still felt like Cam Ward managed to raise his Heisman stock, right? Because he did turnovers with the plays that he made, 24 for 38, 343 passing yards, 4 touchdowns, 2 interceptions, and the fumble. Also rushed for a touchdown. So he had 5 total touchdowns to the 3 turnovers. And what Ward managed to do, that throw and catch on 4th down in the 4th quarter, to Xavier Restrepo. Restrepo catches it from his butt because he'd fallen down. X is unreal. Like Xavier Restrepo, we are so lucky to have that guy, and I hope you guys appreciate him because it was incredible, that play that he made. And then Ward on that other play on that final drive where he was nearly sacked 3 times. The pocket had completely collapsed. He flipped that ball out to Riley Williams, and shout out to number 88. I know Riley Williams. Riley has family who watches the show. His grandpa, Jim, incredible person. His father, incredible person. Shout out to number 88 because he made one of the biggest plays in that game. It was a great play by Ward to flip it out to him. And then Williams, he rumbled all the way to the 2-yard line, put out that stiff arm, nearly got into the end zone, which would have been absolutely incredible. And then, you also had on that drive, you had that bad snap that Ward was that could have been a fumble. Like Ward was able to snatch it up out of the dirt, hand it off to Damian Martinez, who picked up positive yardage on a play that should have been blown up or even turned over. Like, man, you really felt like all the stars aligned for Miami to get that win. And yeah, I agree with you, Skull Leader. Xavier Restrepo, the X-Man, that dude is the absolute GOAT. All right. All right, folks. We're going to have, and people are asking about statuses of players who left the game injured. All I can do is hope and pray everybody's okay. I don't know. We're going to find out more about that as the weekend progresses and into next week. But, oh, man, I could just say, thankfully, thank goodness, Miami was able to come away with this victory. Yeah, I was shaking. I was shaking as well. We got Cal next. We play at like 3 a.m. next week against the Cal. Go 10:30 at night. Same difference. A late game coming up next week. So all right, folks, we're gonna have a huge week of shows coming up on Locked On Canes, and also I can't wait when we have the squad show with the other ACC hosts. I'm sure those guys, and none of their teams are 5-0, but the squad hosts are gonna try to convince me, oh, you stole a win, Donno. We'll see how that goes, but. Folks, make sure you smash that like button. Make sure you subscribe to Locked On Canes. Subscribe on YouTube. Subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, wherever you get your pods. And yeah, we will talk to you throughout the weekend and into next week right here on another episode of Locked On Canes. We are part of the awesome Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.